One of the cool things about music and video games specifically is the fact that you can hear like a sound effect or a jingle or a song, and it immediately invokes an emotion in you. It reminds you of a time or a specific instance. For many people, you know, something like Super Mario Brothers would be the first thing that jumps into their mind when they think of something like that iconic theme of like that's ingrained in so many people's minds, and of course brings back feelings of nostalgia. For me though, I would say the biggest audio sort of memory that I instantly have that automatically just takes me back in time would be Daytona. Like, I don't think you understand. So I didn't go to arcades a lot as a kid. I didn't have like a corner arcade or anything like that. It was pretty much you'd go to this one place that was like a putt-putt, sort of like amusement park. It wasn't really an amusement park. I had like putt-putt, laser tag, golf carts, and arcade games. And then of course I had the mall. So, you know, a few times, you know, I'd probably go to the mall like once a month, and they had, you know, Aladdin's Castle, which was the arcade there. And I would always, like, whenever I was near an arcade, or I went to an arcade, like I would listen for that, because you would enter the arcade and like there would, you know, be all these lights and sounds and all this sort of stuff going on, but then you would hear do, 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 and it was like, oh my god, it's here. And you knew that you had Daytona USA there. And Daytona USA is one of my favorite arcade video games of all time, developed by Sega's AM2 team. Daytona USA is just a very special game for me, because it was one of those times where I saw graphics that just melted my mind. And there was a few times, you know, especially in the arcade era, you would come across games that you were like, that was the whole point of arcades. Arcades were stronger than home consoles were, so you could do more graphically in an arcade than you could do at home consoles. So it was a real glimpse into like the future, like imagining these sorts of games available on your home console at choice. You know, the Sega Genesis couldn't do Daytona USA. It had all these polygonal cars and stuff like that, a high sense of speed. Like your Genesis wasn't doing this. So it was always an experience. And of course, when you're talking about arcade stuffs, you know, there's different versions of the game. My favorite version of the game was the one where you sat down, you had your steering wheel here, and I don't know why I just went steering wheel here, got a little redneck voice there. You had your steering wheel, you'd sit down, and like the seat would be moving and stuff. You're like, oh yeah, this is so awesome. You'd hit into people, and like it was just an experience, dude. It was an absolute experience, and it was something that I would make my parents waste so much money on. Like it was one of the, I believe it was like $1 to play it, which, you know, nowadays, you know, as an adult, it's like, oh, you know, what's $1? But back then, you know, the dollar was a bit stronger. It was worth a bit more, but this was like a premium game to play. And of course, it ended up coming home. Granted, it came home a little bit later than expected. Granted, it came home not in the greatest shape. Daytona USA came out on the Sega Saturn. And that version of the game, while content-wise was right on par with the arcade version of the game, it didn't really have much beyond that. Daytona USA consists of 3 different tracks with 3 different amazing songs, including Blue, Blue Skies, Blue, Blue Skies. And I mean, like, the tracks themselves were very different from each other, but there's still only 3 tracks. Of course, you had mirror mode on the console version of the game for the Saturn. You had all the cars. You had a horse that you could also get to in the game. I don't know why they put a horse in there. I hate horses, but they had a horse in the Sega Saturn version of the game. But the problem with the Saturn version of the game was the frame rate. The frame rate and the visuals were not as good as the arcade, and that's okay. We don't expect arcade quality stuff for a launch title, but this game was rushed because Sega themselves, as much as I love them, they were idiots sometimes, just absolute morons. They upped the release of the system. The Saturn was supposed to come out during a holiday of '94, and they were like, no, we're gonna release it during freaking summer of '94 now. So like retailers were scrambling, developers were scrambling. That's why Virtua Fighter launched in a mess on the Sega Saturn and Daytona USA. unfortunately, was a victim of this as well. Now, as time went on, we got different versions of Daytona USA. We got Daytona USA Championship Edition, which was a much better version of the game. They got rid of the soundtrack, but then there was the Circuit Edition that came out in Japan that had both the arranged soundtrack and the original soundtrack with improved visuals and improved frame rates. So that's kind of like the best version to get on the Saturn. But I mean, Daytona USA has been released on a million different platforms after that. You had the Dreamcast, of course, got a version of Daytona USA, which was a fine version of the game. You had an HD version come out on PS3 and Xbox 360 back when Sega used to re-release their stuff. But ever since then, we haven't seen Daytona USA. Daytona USA got a sequel as well. A lot of people don't know this because that game never came home on any sort of console or anything like that. But Daytona USA did get a sequel, and it's a pretty fun game. You know, it's traditional Sega style racing game, but I still think it's cool. But I'll always remember Daytona USA for two things, because I've only talked about one, and that would be the audio and going into the arcades. But the second thing was just the weirdest thing in the absolute world. So I used to go to, like, it was a private Christian school, but don't think it was money, because all the classrooms were in trailers. Like, I don't know why. And somehow my mom got a job as a teacher there, and she had never been a teacher before, but it was like, you know, like 4-year-old kids. So I don't think it really mattered. And I remember we would have to get to school early. So I would hang out in her classroom before, you know, like 20 minutes early before, you know, my grade started and I had to go to my class. So I remember she had this little kid named Will, and he would always say his name, Will. Like he was a freaking, I'm pretty sure he peed in the sink too, like as he got older, like a year or two later when he was in like kindergarten or first grade. I'm pretty sure he peed in the sink, or he took a dump in the sink. He did some sort of, you know, release of fluids or feces into the sink. I can't remember which one it was, but anyways, he was getting dropped off by his dad, and his dad comes in and he looks at my mom and he's like, you know, I just got a Sega Saturn. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And my mom's like, excuse me? And he's like, yeah, brand new video game system, very expensive. Because it was like, you know, $400. And then you had to buy Daytona, which was another $50. And then if you wanted other stuff, he's like, yeah, I spent like $500 on it for, you know, Sega Saturn and Daytona USA. And my mom's like, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, like, is this dude trying to hit on my mom by offering her to play his Sega Saturn? Meanwhile, my mom's already married to my stepdad at this point. So now I'm like, Ma, can we go over to this dude's house? And she's like, no. I was like, I want to play his Sega Saturn. And she's like, no. And I just thought, you know, looking back at it retrospectively, who the hell? That would be like walking. Like, it's just, the situation is so like, oh, what's up, girl? I got this Nintendo Switch. Trying to f or something. Like, what does that mean? What are you trying to do here? What is wrong with you? That dude's kid, that Will kid, probably ended up becoming a serial killer too. If I can remember his last name, I'll look him up and be like, did your dad ever bang any moms with his Sega Saturn that he got on day one for $400? Like, I don't know. That's just a very funny story to me. But yeah, Daytona USA rules ass. I wish Sega would bring it back, but they're never going to. So I'll still play the Sega Saturn version. I'll play the Dreamcast version. I'll have my memories of it. That's one thing, though. Arcade 1UP, if you're listening to this, make a Daytona. I don't care what Sega's charging you for the IP. Pay it. People will buy this. Make a sit-down cabinet for $1,000. All yours. All yours. I will pay you handsomely. I'll pay you $1,500 for it. Maybe. Keep it to $1,000 here. Keep it to $1,000. Let me know if you have any memories of Daytona USA or of men buying a Sega Saturn and then trying to bang your mom with it because you think that's cool. And as always, guys, thank you. Or maybe that's me. Like, nowadays, be like, hey, what's up, girl? Trying to come play Sega Saturn? What's the deal? You know, how you feeling? But I'm the emulation king nowadays, so it doesn't really matter. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of The Stash. Later.